welcome to this episode of Modern Investor Journeys. My name's Rod Hurd. I'm co-founder of SmartBe Wealth Inc, and I'm with my partner, Art Johnson. We're really excited today to have Eric Bennett with us. Eric's a senior wealth advisor at Scotia Wealth. He's an industry vet for the last 15 years, and he's president of the Rotary Club of Calgary. Look forward to figuring out what your whole investment philosophy is all about.
Thanks for having me, guys. My investment philosophy that is constantly evolving and changing.
Yeah, that's a great comment, Eric. We named this podcast Journey because I think everyone has been on a journey, and I think it's very typical to make sure that investors know that investing is an iterative process. But I also think the difference between a professional investor and a kind of someone playing around with this stuff is you end up actually taking all these changes that you've had and build a philosophy. So that's kind of what we want to delve in today. And the other thing I'm excited about today is you're a young advisor and you're in the midst of probably one of the biggest generational changes in wealth, and get some insights on what your thoughts are being an advisor in this business, because it's typically filled with old guys like me, and we can get crotchety and set in our ways. So it's lovely to have some youth on our show. Yeah, I guess to start, how did you get interested in this field? What made you interested in this crazy gig?
Before I got into the business, I was actually a career chef. So I worked in the service industry for a decade. It got to the point towards the end of that where during the days I would sit down with the owners of some of the restaurants I'd be working at. And, these are typically lawyers or trust fund kids or people with money, and we'd be sitting there in the daytime just chatting and drinking coffee and smoking, because everybody smoked back then too. They'd be sitting there talking on their phone to their broker or reading the stock section of the Financial Times, and so I had no idea what the heck any of that stuff was. It was just so far removed from my reality, and so we just started chatting about it, and I took a more of an interest in it. I always wondered, I'm like, why is this just this world just for this super wealthy group of people? How come that's not, I think, accessible to people of every class, every economic situation? And so that got me kind of interested in that. I also realized too that once I started talking with a few people who worked in the industry that you're essentially building your own business and working for yourself. So all of your blood, sweat, tears, and effort actually go back to your bottom line and not somebody else's. And so that was really interesting to me. And so forced me back into school. 4 years later, degree in finance, came out into the world saying, well, where do I want to start? And so started out in retail banking, did that for a few years, realized that that wasn't my life goal to be an employee. Again, I always wanted to have that self-employed piece to it. And so came out into the wealth, and I interviewed about 3 or 4 of you old school crotchety stockbroker guys, and I took a bunch of guys to lunch at separate times and asked them about what got them into the industry, what was their biggest successes, biggest failures, and if they could do it again at this time, would they do it the same way or what would they do differently? And as a result of those lunches, I got job offers from 3 of them, which I didn't really anticipate. I just wanted to get my information to find out, do I start off as a rookie or do I start off as an associate working for a senior established book? I ended up going the path of going on as a associate to a senior established book. That partnership lasted for about 2 years. I realized quickly that it wasn't going to evolve into some sort of true partnership. It was more of a master and employee relationship. And so I moved on, and then I found myself at another independent brokerage firm working with another team to establish a wealth management practice, because that's what we had done at the previous firm. In the span of a year, I think I put on 22 seminars. I invited partners from tax, trust, and estate planning. These are all things that these guys had never done before. So I built out their wealth management practice and said, okay, well, instead of having 10% of a client's money, how about you look after their full financial picture and attract all of the funds and do the right things at the right times for people. And that was a different model for these guys. And so after under a year, I quickly realized that they never really had any intention to build a wealth practice. They just wanted more accounts to trade with. And so
transactional.
Yeah. So I said, well, you can't say you're going to do wealth and then kind of do the old switcheroo and just stick to transactional stock business. So I quickly left that behind, put my hat out in the ring, and I said, okay, you know what, enough working for old crotchety guys. Time for me to do this by myself, right? And
So you
so
could become an old crotchety guy.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Why not, right? So I started out as a rookie at Scotia McLeod, just about 10 years ago. So came over, zero assets, because everything we did, I left. I didn't want any of that issue. I did bring all my marketing and all of my prospect pipeline that I built over the previous 3 years, and so I wasn't that much of a rookie. I knew what I needed to do. And I knew that at the time that this business wasn't about being the best broker, wasn't about being the best portfolio manager. This business is asset gathering. And so I knew at that time, if you could have the best model. There's a few guys I know who, are CFA, CA types, just running this. They're so smart, running the smartest portfolio models, but they had the tiniest books, and it's like, wow, you guys are like rocket science smart, when it comes to option strategies and derivatives and risk management and laying out these incredibly complicated portfolios. But you don't have anyone to sell that to. And that's failure, right? That's why you struggle the whole time. But you have to realize that maybe you're in the wrong business. Maybe as that, you should, start your own fund and sell that back to the investor channel. But you can't say you're going to be an investment advisor, a wealth advisor, and then also try to do that other hat at the same time. So for me, I knew right along it was all about understanding the client. It's all people driven, conversations driven. It's not product driven, and that's how you attract assets.
That's fascinating, Eric. It's a terrific glimpse into the early part of your career. So how has your thinking about the entire practice changed over the last 10 years of being independent, as well as how you're approaching the whole asset gathering world? Because I think you do some very innovative things and you're in the community significantly.
I brought some bad behavior, bad habits with me when I was working as an associate for those other more established books. One of them was the idea that you need to build a pitch book. And so I had spent, I don't know, probably like a few hundred hours, if you look at the thing, building a pitch book. And the pitch book is something that you would bring to a new prospect client meeting, sit down with them and start walking through page over page of your philosophy, the Tao of portfolio management. And I had it all. I had all these quotes and everything. It was awesome, and I was so proud of it. It was double page, glossy. It was awesome. I spent so much work. I was talking to a CFO of an oil company. This is my first year as a rookie here at Scotia, and then I finally got down in front of him, and I was pitching. I was going through the book and the charts and everything, and he actually nodded off to sleep in front of me, and it was so
That's
funny
hilarious.
because I saw him do it, just kind of nod straight off. I kept pitching. I kept talking. I kept going through because I loved what I had built so much, and I would like move charts around and whatever.
That's classic.
Then he woke up kind of and I snorted and put his hand on top of the book, and and he pushes it away and he goes, "Yeah, I don't want any of that." He goes, "The reason why I took the call is because I have a lot of my company public stock and I want to buy more of it. So I'm going to give you a bunch of it, and then you're going to use that as collateral to margin and give me more and buy more of my company stock." And I said, "Oh," I was already an hour 20 into the meeting and going like, "Oh, that was the valuable lesson." After that, I'm like, no pitch book. Like, how can you start pitching before you even actually ask someone why you're there, why you're speaking with them in the first place? What do they need, right? And so I left the pitch book world behind, which is what I was trained at earlier. You have to have a good pitch, always be closing, but to just bring in like a red notebook. And that was it. And so I went every single meeting after that was just this. That's it. I had nothing else on me. I had no other sales material. And I would just sit down and just open page, ask them about them and listen. Like, what a concept. How are things going? What are your biggest fears right now? Are you working with someone like me? How's that worked out for you? They'll tell you everything that they're looking for. And then you take that information away and you promise, okay, I'm going to use, all my resources, and I'm going to come back with some ideas. And we're going to work those ideas into what you might be looking for, like what a concept, and so when I flipped the script and started doing that, people started signing up. and I found like I was closing probably most all of the conversations I was having. That was a big aha moment for me. It was you can't product pitch, you got to find out what someone needs, and then you can come back with the solutions.
Gotcha.
And what I love about that is sometimes you might see things, read between the line, that they don't know that they have a exposure to or weakness to, and that's where you can bring back a solution and then bring a couple other ideas, and they look at you completely different. They go, I wasn't even considering that. I believe it's not what you make, it's what you keep that counts. Especially nowadays too, if you look at the trends of taxation ever increasing, and I bet you after this COVID crisis is managed, we're going to be paying for that for a very long time, which means I think an ever increasing taxation model from governments around the world. So I think that having a focus on tax efficiency and effectiveness is going to be paramount to success going forward. In my conversations with people, I find that the rational process, here's portfolio management, here's the risk that you're taking on, here's the standard deviations in your portfolio, your correlations in your portfolio, what you're paying for. It makes sense, right? And people nod their head, but you're dealing with them up in their heads, but you're not dealing with them from an emotional standpoint. So I found like you could put so much common sense up here, and they're going like, wow, what I'm doing is totally wrong, I should be doing that. And then when you go to sign the paper to bring them on, they're nowhere, because they haven't had that emotional decision response. And so I find that when you speak to things like, okay, how much did you pay last year in taxes to CRA? You could see people, their shoulders go up and their head goes down, and they get visibly angry in front of you. It's an emotional response. And if you get that emotional response, then you could say, well, how about I alleviate that pressure for you? You could keep doing the exact same thing you're doing, but let's talk about making sure that you're not sending a dime more than you should, or that you have been doing for the last 15 years. So that's a bit into my story and philosophy a little bit.
I think you've hit on something there, and it's something we talk over and over about in this podcast. Are insights worth or not worth something? And I use an analogy as if I wanted to lose weight. If I didn't know that I needed to cut down on calories and exercise more, that'd be a tremendously valuable insight. But people know that now, and it's kind of meaningless. When people are successful with a lot of things, it's because they start to build not just an insight, but actually an emotional connection to the thing itself. And they get an endowed effect themselves, and they actually start to understand it in a way that is not just, the typical insights. On the other side of emotion, what have you learned about investors?
Thanks to guys like Ken, who I met early on in the industry, Ken McNeil. He's the one that kind of introduced me to behavioral biases that we all have when it comes to investing. And he introduced me to Schiller's books, Animal Spirits, which was a book that I started to give out to all my clients because it was actually a really good read, and it did a great job of explaining all of our biases and explaining that, okay, retail investors, the DIY guy at home, professional money managers, institutional guys, everybody is the same when it comes to behavioral bias. If anyone's out there saying that they're different, that they're going to be selling high and they're going to be the ones to buy low, like that is like a strange defect in human behavior, to be able to actually do that successfully all the time, just because it goes against our internal, like who we are and how we respond to things. So what I try to put in place when it comes to the investment management side of the business, or when I'm talking to clients about how we put things together, I want to put as many things in between us and that big red button, which is the button that makes us do the wrong thing at the wrong time, pull the parachute, sell at a market bottom, do whatever, because we're all bombarded with all of the same information when the world is falling. Like, for example, in financial crisis in 2009, we are all getting that same information. We didn't know what the recovery was going to look like. All we saw was two major banks fail, and we had no idea how we were going to get out of that. I saw crotchety old senior advisors under their desks. I saw guys stop coming into work, and I'm going like, wow, you guys are 30 years in the biz and you don't even know? I'm like, nobody knows when we're in these environments. In hindsight, we look back and we could be like, well, obviously I put all my money in stocks in the bottom of 2000. I'm like, no, you didn't. You wouldn't. That we didn't have a clear path ahead for another year and a half, and even then it didn't feel great. So when it comes to building of portfolios, management. I always try to look for those things that are that separate the human emotional response from us having to make a decision at that time. So having things like an auto computer, unemotional, unbiased trigger, like an auto rebalance, is amazing.
Rules based.
It's rules based, and
Yeah.
it's one of the only, I think, free lunches, in this business. If you could just have something that is basic as that setup, you're going to do so much better than a lot of people who are kind of winging it and at the mercy of their emotions.
Makes good sense, Eric. It's fascinating that you've landed on this whole rules-based philosophy. Notwithstanding your friendship with Art and Art being at Scotia, and you're looking at this crazy guy who is an early innovator in all of this academic quantitative investing, how did you start to get interested in learning more about the science of investing in finance and extend beyond an auto rebalance to start to investigate some of the academic world?
It's a natural extension when you start to look at rules based, look at behavior management and putting things in place that remove the human from a lot of those decision making moments. And so for me, I came from that into multi asset, multi managed type of portfolios, very pension style investment management for clients. And honestly, that's what led to a lot of deep and long conversations with Art when he came to Scotia at that time. He'd call me because our offices were so close too. I'd go walking by, then he would go, "Hey, I got something to show you," and I'd be like, "Oh."
He's always got something to show us. Yeah.
Like, okay, so of course, I loved talking about this stuff. Like even with like Ken, where we'd meet monthly to talk about what he was building out, and so Art's conversations were quite deeper and a lot more involved, I suppose, into the different components of where return is derived from. And so that was quite interesting to me. Another thing that Art used to do, which I thought was really cool, was when we looked at adding value, what advisors were adding value for their clients. And you can track this on a monthly basis just through what the firms produce, which is their their scorecards, which is like, okay, each month over month, okay, here's your AUM, how is it growing? Here's what a balanced portfolio returned for the year. Say it was like 6%. If you just started off the year, January 1, with this much in AUM, and then December 31st, you had this much. And if you just grew it at whatever the market balance return would have been, that 6% or whatever, most people should have like grown by that much. So what we found is a massive chunk of advisors who are running more of a transactional based business, at least what we assumed they were doing, they would just constantly be hemorrhaging money throughout the year. And then we could look at these other advisors and be like, well, yeah, they're actually growing. They're growing at that rate of what the market grew at, what a balanced return should have been for that year. So they are adding at least value to their client base, right?
Yeah, I know, guys, they would destroy wealth with their stock picking, was what you noticed very quickly.
Yes.
And when Eric and I would look at that, and we knew this intuitively, but it was really, I decided to do this because I would argue with management over resources all the time. And so it was one of the best tools I had to say, like, I thought you guys are supposed to be adding wealth to these clients, and it looks like these guys are getting the yachts. When you go to wealth, you have a holistic view, but that old transaction model, what was even worse in those numbers, probably the top 20% of the guys actually maybe beat the market, but 80% of the other clients underperformed massively. So not only was the number horrible, but in those numbers, you just intuitively knew, because we had been in that, Eric had started in that practice. I had been in that practice for a long time. And really your job is to find, 15 to 20 stock addicts, junkies that will continually turn over the portfolio. And some may be successful or not, but the ability to do what Eric was trying to do as a young advisor, that was so attractive to me, because we had gone to Scotia as well to build out our wealth business. And he was just adamant in his belief, and it was wonderful to watch. I was trying to say, that's great, but also make sure that if you can get into money management in the right way, you're going to scale all these wonderful decisions you're going to do, not like the old business. So yeah, but that was a fascinating look at a brokerage firm.
I'm not here just to maximize my trading revenue, even though firms love that. But I think if you care about the long-term growth and effect on your client, then you should be looking for the best solutions at that time. The factor-based conversations were really interesting. They're really heavy. For me, again, my whole mindset was get the planning in place, make sure you're doing the right thing for the right reason, and then use a managed money approach, or bring in like the institutional players or the right type of automated portfolio management that handles that for you. And then it's just a matter of checking on that portfolio and making sure it's doing what it's supposed to be doing.
So, Art, you often talk about two camps in the advisor community, those that have come from an investment focused perspective and those that have come from a planning focused perspective. I think what I'm hearing you say, Eric, is that through time and through your journey, you've sort of become more planning and service oriented and have your portfolios and investment side of things more or less in a rules based system or on autopilot based on the best practices that you've learned.
Yeah, exactly. And I find if you find the path to the most efficient type of solution, if you can get there, then it's just a matter of keeping clients aware of what's going on under the hood of the car. It's one of the dangers I've found with managed money is that you're not contacting clients as frequently as they were trained to be contacted before to talk about trading ideas. I never hear from my broker. The dangers of the managed approach are there, so I find you have to shift topics of conversation and stuff to something else, right? Because you're not calling them all the time about making these trades. And that was another thing that I thought was really interesting in Art's approach. It was very science driven. I call it the white lab coat conversation. So if a client really did want to go down that rabbit hole, like if you had a few engineer type clients, they would appreciate that. So for me, I was at that point in time where I'm asset gathering, planning based, managed money, not a lot of frequency of contact on a monthly basis to talk about what the mechanics, what's going on within the portfolio as a result of managed money. I had to find some other way or some other excuse, I guess, to up my contact frequency with clients. So I figured, well, this is something else. This is something new. That most people aren't being made aware of. And so for me, it was like, oh, here's another avenue. Here's another conversation. Here's another excuse or reason to reach out and talk about why we're doing what we're doing with their money.
One of the seminal events, I guess, in smart beta quant factors was in 2009, the Norwegian pension plan. After the financial crisis that Eric had alluded to earlier, and my God, what an event for me after all these years in the business, like to see companies like Merrill Lynch and these cornerstones that you would watch on Louis Rukeyser, which is an old show on PBS. They were like these, Lehman Brothers were these stalwarts of the industry were no longer in business. So post that, the Norwegian pension, which is very transparent and run and has to talk to the Norwegian people, they did not do well in the financial crisis, and this is one of the biggest pensions in the world. So if you're in the asset management business, you would actually probably go give your best ideas to them for nothing, just for the reputation to say that you're dealing with them. So they could get anyone in the world to run their money. And they brought in 3 academics. What happened is they looked at the factors that Eric had talked about, that we talk about in this podcast. And at that time, that the kind of idea was coming out of academia. This was getting a bit bigger. But what happened in the pension is these were kind of considered styles. If you're a market aficionado of funds, you go onto Morningstar and they've kind of got a style box and they'll say, you're a growth manager or a value manager. And they were thought that they were not as a big deal. And these academics went into that pension and they said, actually, your active managers are only using these factors to produce the returns. And so the Norwegian pension fired all of their active managers and started to build out factor portfolios. So when Eric and I were talking, I was saying, you're using these kind of institutional managers, you're on the right track. But I guess the disconnect for me was that these institutional people are actually using the same stuff we're using, but they still have the human bias in it. And you're back to selling that this guy's a good manager in that, where if you could change the color to where returns come from and why the market works, you have much better control over the planning outcomes and the goals you want. So that was a huge part of the conversation. And that was a huge event for people in our world when that whole pension plan switched over. So can you talk a bit about our conferences that you've been to, and just you got to see some of the scientists we work with, and you got fully immersed in the SmartBe world, and just what have those been like for someone coming into this world?
I thought the hikes were the best part of the conferences myself.
Actually, Patty and Nicole organizing all the wonderful things is the best part. So
yeah.
The beautiful settings of Lake Louise.
Yeah.
No, you guys do a great job on that, and just the caliber of speaker and talent that you guys bring to these things. I've never seen something like that before. It's not like a Fidelity conference where they're bringing in all these rock star managers of the moment. You're bringing in some of the best minds. Well, you're also bringing in people like from the finance and mathematics departments at the University of Calgary to come along and hear the story, and they get to talk about what they're working on for this next batch of students that are coming through. And so you're hitting it on both angles, right down from that educational piece to at the university level, and straight through to people who are in the seat managing money or making decisions on behalf of clients, and then people who are very well known writers and finance bloggers, and so you've definitely done a great job of covering all the bases at these conferences.
How did the scientific approach help you when you saw it in person?
Yeah, what were your takeaways?
Being up here in Calgary, Canada, we're a tiny little pond up here, I guess, when you compare it to like the United States. And you guys are bringing up the guys who are leading the charge in factor-based investing, rules-based investing in the United States. And I always find that Canada, we're a few years behind on that pickup. And so I always leave your conferences with a lot more ammunition and a lot more conversations to have with clients that aren't actually taking place right now in the brokerage world, in the advisor world, right? At least here in Calgary, at any sort of large scale. That's kind of one of the great benefits that I've gotten from the SmartBe conferences, is bringing a lot of those new ideas, concepts and ideas that clients aren't actually being presented.
Less out of the marketing sphere and more into the scientific method and academia sphere.
The white lab coat scientist, heavy science approach to this. It's my job to take that information and repurpose it, I suppose, and rebrand it into something that general public can understand.
It's funny.
I think that's Rod. You always do a great job, Rod, at those conferences of summarizing, a very highly technical presentation into very simple language, because we can go so deep down that rabbit hole. But if you lose your client who you're trying to explain the concept and philosophy to, they either A, are stunned into, okay, I just trust you and go ahead and do it, or B, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Or like your CFO, they're falling asleep as you're getting into the weeds.
Yeah, leaving the conference, listening to some of the greatest minds that are kind of in this space, and then taking that verbiage back through my marketing and my communication back to my clients and my centers of influence. So I could do a pretty good job speaking with, a few people I know in trust and estate lawyers and tax advisors here in Calgary. But I think the next step for me, I was thinking, would be to actually invite them out to one of your conferences, because I think they need to also see it firsthand.
Art often talks about, as he talks about raising two twin teenage daughters, that with all of the innovation, with all the technology, there is a very interesting space for the type of individuals that has the ability to take in the deep dive scientific. So not put the white lab coat on, whether it's in finance or AI or machine learning or whatever space that is, but has that unique ability to be able to walk in that world, understand it, but moreover, communicate it to the masses in such a way that's palatable and gets through the biases and creates that emotional connection. So it seems, Eric, that you do a fantastic job of that in your practice. And my next question is, you've got a really healthy business and it's growing, and you're out in the community a lot. Tell us and tell the other advisors that are listening to the podcast your secrets to having successful capital campaigns.
You cry a lot? No.
You beg?
Yeah. Beg, cry, yeah, anything you can. No. What I found with most clients or people out there in the world, they've been pitched to death. So if you're actually going to go out there to a prospect and be like, hey, you know, I'd love to talk to you about this, they're going to be like, well, I get 30 calls a day to talk about that. There's no interest. So what's really worked for me is kind of doing more experience driven events. And so what I mean by that is, if we want to talk about the future of AI and how AI is being incorporated into your portfolio and investments, I'm not just going to say, okay, come to this presentation on AI, because people are going to be like, well, there's 20 other guys out there inviting me to something similar. Instead, we did, okay, well, we're going to host something at the Tesla dealership, and we're all going to go test drive Teslas for the day. But I'm flying in the PM from like Horizons ETFs or something from Toronto to join us that morning, and he's going to give us, as we're having coffee, he's going to give us a history of robotics and AI and automation, and to get to where we are today. I would tell anyone on the street, any doctor, any prospective client, like that's what we're doing. They'll all show up for that. Because they're getting something of an experience, they're getting a connection with the underlying story, i.e. the whole Tesla and electric car thing. They get a unique experience, but then they also get a very smart presentation on not a product, but just like the history and what innovation and what is happening in that industry. So you make those two connections. I found that the closure rate on that was incredibly high. The participation rate in that is really high. So again, I think being pitched to death, lunch presentations, knife and fork presentations, those things are, you can get a lot of people out to them, but no one will have any buy-in, but if you have a neat experience set up for somebody, but they also feel a bit smarter leaving it, and the two tie into each other, that's been a big reason why I've been able to drive a lot of new assets in the door. So again, you just want to create that story in which people will go and then tell their friends and their networks about what they were up to.
You also use the volunteer sphere a lot in that piece that may be interesting.
That's been the second thing. I've been nominated for a lovely award this year from Wealth Professional for excellence in philanthropy and community service, and that gala is taking place next week. So
congrats.
We'll see. Yeah, thanks. We'll see if I get across the finish line for that. But
I think you're already across the finish line just in focusing on service, because I think in a business where a lot of the times you're in your own head, and I've learned this from you, Eric, and I do it myself, but service is one of the only times that you're actually not thinking about yourself and you're doing stuff for others. And it's probably one of the purest gifts you can give yourself. So I want to hear more on that.
Yeah, what a concept, hey?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm the current president of the Rotary Club of Calgary this year. Been a member of the downtown Rotary Club for 10 years. So I found that early when I was 30. And that was at a time when I came, just had come over as a rookie, starting from zero. And all these other rookies, I think in our rookie class, we had 35 of us. Now I think there's 4 of us in the industry now. But at that time, everyone was like, where are you going every Tuesday? How can you give away all these hours? You should be out there closing business and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, I kind of am. I found Rotary through a prospect. I was prospecting, and he said, hey, meet me at the Palliser for lunch. And I showed up there, and there's a big group of people, a couple hundred people in this big crystal ballroom, and they sang "O Canada," and we marched in, and I got to meet all these businessmen from Calgary and businesswomen, and the guest speaker that day was the chief technical officer for Virgin Galactic. So that was Branson's space travel company, and I'm sitting there going like, oh, this is their guest speaker, and she's talking about the future of space travel, and afterwards, I got to hear a little bit more about what Rotary was and what they did in the community and what they did around the world. And I was like, oh, so it's just a volunteer service club. You guys meet up, and I looked around the room, and I'm like, oh, there's the owners of the Calgary Flames, and I'm like, oh, there's the owners of, or the president of that major oil company, and oh, there's that, and there's this, and there's that, and I'm looking around the room, going like, huh, this isn't a bad place for someone like me who's just growing a business to hang out. So I found it first from a truly selfish point of view to prospect these guys. I learned so quickly that it was so far from the truth. I don't think I prospected a single Rotarian. There's actually quite a few members of the club who are clients of mine, but that was a result of me inviting them to join the club and showing them what Rotary was. So I used that forum, a service club, to invite prospective clients to join me for certain guest speakers and certain lunches, and to explain to them about all these projects that I'm involved in, and they get to sit there and look around the room like I did before, and they look around like who Eric's hanging out with every Tuesday, who aligns with his moral compass, and so on. And that was just another thing which allowed people to feel a little bit more confident in looking at me as someone, as a professional partner. So I closed more business that way, indirectly, instead of actually prospecting a group like that, which a lot of people join service clubs like that to prospect the membership. And you can see it. I think there's a bunch of advisors in and out at one time. They usually last like a year, then they fade away. They're there for the wrong reasons. They just want to close business immediately, and they find out that it's not lucrative to them, so they move on. I stuck it out, and I've been involved with all these different projects, been involved with running the club, been involved with booking the speakers, so it's just been a way for me to really shrink Calgary into like less than a degree of separation, because when I reach out from the Rotary perspective and say, hey, would you like to come and be a guest speaker, Mr. So-and-so, we meet Tuesday at the Crystal Ballroom at the Palliser, we have a couple hundred people in attendance, and yada, yada, yada. I'm not calling them, prospecting them about their money like 99 other people calling from an investment firm would be talking to them about. I'm bringing them out to something. And then when I follow up with them, a week, a month, the circles just shrink. You start to see these people out and about in the community. And now I have a relationship with them kind of on an even level versus someone trying to get through their secretary or whomever to sell them something. I meet them out at a restaurant and I go, oh, hey, hey, Mr. So-and-so or whatever. And then people are looking around going, how do you know that guy? He's my boss or whatever. And it's like, oh, you know what? I invited him to this and that and whatever. So, and that's been a massive expander for me.
It's a long game. It's a very long game, and it speaks a lot to your character.
It's a life game, and that's what I realized. I'm like being around these people. It's a good thing. It is like a community building thing. It's something that's not regular in society anymore. And in that, it stands out. And I think it's even more important now because everyone is so involved with their, communicating this way or through their phones, right? And so you have less of that personal engagement, interaction within your city and community. And so when you have these sort of clubs that exist and have those options, like it's just an amazing thing. Like if I missed a meeting or two, I'd be getting a call from someone, like George Brookman or something. Hey, Eric, I haven't seen you at meeting at Rotary for a couple of weeks. You okay? I'm like, wow, the president of this government is calling me directly just to see if I'm okay. How cool is that? Like what a family, what a community, involving yourself with a service club. And so it's also that ability to give back into a community, but it's also that fellowship and camaraderie that you're building, which again is such a rare thing in our digital age now. I think that these types of clubs are going to be more important than ever to maintain that actually human relation, right? Yeah,
Sure.
what a concept.
Yeah, it's awesome, Eric.
Let's face it, we're in sales, and there's a part of us that is selfish as well because we're humans. There's part of us that's magnanimous and gracious as well. We're all of these things, but it's fascinating, Eric, how along the way, what is so attractive about you as a person is there is just a goodness and a trusted advisor to everything you do. And even the self-recognition that you went into Rotary selfishly, I mean, people can't even recognize that, but it's wonderful to have someone like you in financial services, and you represent the best of kind of what this business can create. And then also in the Calgary community, to have someone as enthusiastic as you. Community is such a hard thing to get in this world now. Yet it is, you can just see how vital it's been to you, and it's vital to all of us. I think your journey has just been fascinating to hear.
In this world, or at least what I've been seeing, media is becoming less and less reliable. How can you communicate a theme or a concept through a 5-second soundbite? And so now there's like the big fights of the big news media outlets out there, to who's fake and who's not. And I honestly think the form of the podcast is the saving grace going forward. Having long form, free form conversations like this, like a podcast, people love to see this. They love to see real people having true conversations, speaking about concepts and ideas, and working through challenges and problems and finding solutions in a proper way versus just like a derived 5-second soundbite that you get through newspaper, as you get through your BNNs and CNNs and Fox Newses and everything like that. So I honestly think that right now, like what you guys are building here is, just the start of it. And I think for people to get real information, this is the forum where they'll come to.
Oh, it's such a pleasure, Eric. If I'm taking away a few things from our conversation today, pretty early on, you realized that rules-based was critically important to cover off on your behavioral biases. I really like that point. And the other point of shifted from your pitch book to your red book. Listen, listen, listen. And, we had a conversation with Mark Miller from Constellation Software in another one of our forums, and he was just all about patience and listening. So you're reiterating a common theme that if you're going to get into this service world, you have to be good at listening to what the needs of your clients are. And I really liked your perspective around using a social platform of service in the community, not necessarily for direct prospecting, but for it felt more like an alignment of values where you're able to build trust and establish relationships with people outside of business because you're genuinely interested in them. That has enabled you to be successful in growing your book and making things tick for you.
It's really important that at the end of the day, it's not even the return, it's what you're going to keep. So if you lower your fees, if you buy factors that actually have a reason why you're going to get a return, all of these little things add up. If you focus, ETFs are extremely tax efficient. That's what Eric's appeal to them. All of these little things, the things that you can control, are going to have probably a bigger impact than trying to do all the things that you thought you should do. When Eric, went from being a chef to this, he probably thought it was all about these other things. And then in this massive journey, he's learned that no, it's actually about what you get to keep after all of this crazy stuff. And I believe that's, it was always about that in our conversations. And then the other big thing that I always loved about our conversations was he recognized that this is such a behavioral journey for people that having the right ability to communicate in an empathetic and understanding way how behavior derails your investments. And it's just colored every part of his life. So it's been just a great conversation.
Thanks so much, Eric. And to our listeners today, you've been listening to Modern Investor Journey. I'm Rod Hurd, co-founder of SmartBe Wealth. I'm here with my partner, Art Johnson. We've been talking to Eric Bennett, who's a senior wealth advisor at Scotia Wealth. Eric, it's been such a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, guys. I look forward to the next conference.
The information contained in this podcast is 1, for Canadian residents only, 2, for informational purposes only, and 3, not intended to be, nor shall it be interpreted as, a recommendation or the provision of advice, including without limitation financial, investing, sales, marketing, legal, accounting, or tax advice, and shall not be relied upon by you in that regard. SmartBe Wealth Inc. cannot guarantee the accuracy of any information contained in this podcast that is derived from third-party sources, although we believe those sources to be reliable. SmartBe Wealth Inc. and its affiliates may receive compensation derived from investments in or sales of its products or both. SmartBe Wealth Inc.'s products described in this podcast may not be applicable or available with respect to all investors and may change without notice. Past performance does not guarantee future comparable results. Exchange-traded funds, ETFs, are not guaranteed. Their values change frequently and past performance may not be repeated. Investors will pay management fees and expenses, but they will not pay commissions or trailing commissions, and they may experience a gain or loss from their investment in or sale of an ETF. You may request a prospectus for an ETF from your financial advisor by visiting smartbewealth.com or by calling SmartBe Wealth Inc. at 403-930-8693. The prospectus includes investment objectives, risks, fees, expenses, and other information that you should consider carefully before investing. Please consult a lawyer or tax professional regarding your specific legal or tax situation, respectively.